Welcome, everyone. We're diving deep into Hyperfocus today, a book by Chris Bailey. It's all about understanding and managing our attention, you know, which can be tough these days with so many distractions everywhere we turn.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
I mean, the thing that really struck me was Bailey's main argument. He says mastering focus isn't just about productivity. It's about boosting creativity and happiness, too.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
So to help us navigate this whole attention thing, Bailey introduces these two key modes of focus, hyperfocus and scatterfocus.
Hmm.
Have you heard of these before?
Definitely familiar with those terms.
So hyperfocus, that's like that laser sharp concentration you use when you're tackling something complex, like when you're trying to write an essay or
Hmm.
solve a really hard math problem. It's about blocking out everything else and just diving deep into the task.
Yeah, like that feeling when you get so engrossed in a project that time just seems to disappear.
Exactly. But then there's scatterfocus, and the book makes it clear we can't be in hyperfocus mode all the time. Our brains need a break.
For sure, we need time to recharge, and that's where scatter focus comes in.
Right. Scatterfocus, it's about intentionally letting your mind wander, which might sound kind of counterintuitive, but Bailey argues it's actually super important for creativity and problem solving.
It's like giving your brain a chance to make those connections in the background, while you're taking a walk or just daydreaming.
So we need both hyperfocus and scatterfocus to really thrive. And one of the things that really hit home for me was that attention is a limited resource. It's not something we have an endless supply of.
That's such a good point. It's like a muscle that gets tired if we overuse it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book actually talks about working memory, which is that mental workspace we use to hold information while we're using it.
It's fascinating how limited our working memory is.
Right. And Bailey calls this the magical number 4, meaning we can only really focus on about 4 things at once.
Think about it. If you try to remember a list of 10 random words, you'll probably only be able to recall about 4 or 5.
Exactly. And this has huge implications for how we approach multitasking. Trying to do too many things at once is like trying to shine a spotlight on everything in a room. It just doesn't work.
It's spreading ourselves too thin.
Right. So we need to be much more selective about what we choose to focus on, especially in a world that's constantly bombarding us with distractions.
Mm.
And that's where the practical strategies in this book come in. It's like a toolkit for dealing with those attention stealers.
I'm always looking for ways to manage those distractions. They can be so overwhelming.
Me too. And one of the big takeaways is the importance of creating a distraction-free environment.
Yeah.
I mean, really taking control of our
Like
surroundings.
silencing those notifications and finding a quiet space to work.
Yes. It's about being proactive instead of letting those external triggers hijack our attention. Hyperfocus is packed with tips like that, which makes it super valuable for anyone who wants to get more focused and get more done.
I agree. It's a great resource for anyone feeling overwhelmed by the constant distractions.
It's like Bailey gives us a roadmap to reclaiming our attention.
And who doesn't need a little more focus these days? And it's not just about those external distractions, it's also about managing the internal ones, those thoughts that pop up and pull us away.
Oh, absolutely. Bailey calls those open loops, like those nagging reminders or those unfinished tasks that just clutter up our mental space.
Right. It's like they're constantly vying for our attention.
And he's got this great tip for dealing with them. Capture those thoughts, write them down on paper or put them in a to-do list, get them out of your head.
It's amazing how much that helps. It's like giving those thoughts a designated space so they're not constantly interrupting.
So once we've tamed those distractions, we can really start to harness the power of hyperfocus. But the book doesn't just tell us to focus harder. It actually gives us a roadmap for making hyperfocus a habit.
Yeah, it's not just about willpower, it's about building those good habits.
Exactly. And one of the key steps is setting clear intentions. Before we dive into a task, we need to define what we want to accomplish. It's like having a destination in mind before we start a journey.
Right, otherwise we risk getting lost or sidetracked along the way.
And speaking of motivation, Bailey also talks about the importance of connecting with the why behind our actions.
Yeah, when we understand why we're doing something, it becomes much easier to stay focused and engaged.
It's like tapping into that intrinsic motivation that fuels our efforts.
And beyond setting intentions and finding purpose, the book also gives us some really practical tips for overcoming resistance to focusing, those times when you just can't seem to get started or you keep getting pulled away.
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
And one of the most effective strategies is breaking down large tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks.
It's like that saying, how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's much less daunting to tackle a small piece of something than to try to do the whole thing at once.
And once we've broken down the task, Bailey suggests creating a ritual to signal the start of our focus session.
Oh, I love that idea.
It could be anything, clear your workspace, putting on your noise-canceling headphones, even just taking a few deep breaths to center yourself. It's about creating a mental cue that tells your brain, okay, it's time to focus now.
I like that, creating a little ritual to shift into focus mode.
And then on the flip side, we need to be just as intentional about cultivating scatterfocus. It's not about just zoning out in front of the TV. It's about engaging in activities that allow our minds to wander in a productive way.
Right. It's about giving our brains a chance to make those connections without forcing it.
Exactly. Bailey talks about 3 different types of scatterfocus: unintentional, purposeful, and problem crunching. Unintentional scatterfocus. That's the kind that just happens naturally often when we're doing routine tasks.
Like when you're doing the dishes or folding laundry and your mind starts to drift off to other things.
And while they can be a productivity killer if you're trying to hyperfocus, it can also be a source of creative inspiration.
Absolutely. Those random connections our brains make during those moments can lead to some really cool breakthroughs.
But if we want to really harness the power of scatterfocus, we need to be more deliberate about it, and that's where purposeful scatterfocus comes in.
This is where we choose activities that allow our minds to wander freely. Things like taking a walk in nature, listening to music, or even just taking a relaxing bath.
It's about giving our brains a break from all that directed thinking and allowing those subconscious processes to work their magic.
And then there's problem crunching scatter focus. This is when we're intentionally letting our minds wander, but we're directing that wandering towards a specific problem we're trying to solve.
So it's like focused mind wandering.
Exactly. It's when we step back from a challenge and let it simmer in our subconscious. Often that's when those aha moments happen, those moments of insight.
Like when you've been wrestling with a problem for hours, and then the solution just pops into your head while you're out for a run or taking a shower.
It's amazing how often that happens.
Bailey explains this through the Zeigarnik effect, which is this idea that our brains are wired to remember unfinished tasks more easily than completed ones.
It's like our minds are constantly working in the background trying to tie up those loose ends.
So by intentionally stepping away from a problem and letting it percolate in our minds, we're actually increasing the chances of having one of those breakthrough moments.
So how do we actually cultivate more scatter focus in our daily lives?
The book has tons of great tips, but one that I found really helpful is the importance of taking regular breaks throughout the day.
Breaks are so important.
Even a 5-minute walk or a few moments of meditation can do wonders for our focus and creativity. It's about giving our minds a chance to recharge and make those connections.
And speaking of recharging, we can't forget about sleep.
Absolutely. Bailey emphasizes that when we're sleep deprived, our attention suffers, our minds wander more. We're more easily distracted. It's like trying to function on an empty tank.
It's true, when we're tired, everything feels harder and we're much more likely to get pulled off track.
And the research shows that even a small amount of sleep loss can have a huge impact on our cognitive function, including our ability to focus, process information, and make decisions.
So getting enough sleep is crucial, not just for our physical health, but for our mental sharpness as well.
And another important factor that affects our attention is our energy level.
Our energy levels definitely fluctuate throughout the day.
Right. Bailey points out that our focus and productivity tend to ebb and flow along with our natural energy cycles. There are times when we're buzzing with energy and we can tackle anything, and then there are those times when we're dragging and can barely string a sentence together.
We've all been there.
And the book suggests that we can be more productive if we try to align those demanding tasks with our peak energy periods and save those lower energy times for less demanding activities or even for intentional scatter focus.
It's about working with our natural rhythms instead of fighting against them.
Exactly, like understanding our own personal energy map and planning our day accordingly. And this ties into another interesting topic that Bailey explores: the effects of alcohol and caffeine on our attention.
Oh, yeah, those can be tricky.
He talks about how these substances can have both positive and negative effects on our focus, depending on how and when we use them. For instance, a little bit of alcohol can sometimes enhance creativity by loosening our inhibitions. But too much alcohol obviously impairs our focus and judgment.
Right, it's all about moderation.
And while caffeine can give us a temporary boost to our alertness and focus, if we overdo it, we can end up feeling jittery anxious, and it can even disrupt our sleep, which ultimately undermines our attention in the long run.
So it's about finding that sweet spot and understanding how these things affect us individually.
And then beyond what's going on inside our bodies, Bailey also talks about the importance of our external environment, particularly the rise of open-plan offices, which can be a bit of a double-edged sword when it comes to focus.
Definitely open plan offices can be great for collaboration and communication, but they can also be incredibly distracting, especially for people who need those long stretches of uninterrupted focus.
Right. The book offers some strategies for dealing with distractions in those environments.
Yeah.
Things like using noise-canceling headphones or creating those little personal rituals to signal the start of a focus session.
It's about taking control of your surroundings as much as possible and creating an environment that supports your attentional needs.
Exactly. And finally, the book reveals this really interesting link between happiness and attention management.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that.
It turns out that happier people tend to be more focused and productive, while those who are stressed or unhappy tend to struggle more with distractions.
That makes sense.
Like this positive feedback loop. When we're happier, we're more engaged, which fuels our focus and productivity, leading to greater success and even more happiness.
So it's all connected.
So investing in activities that boost our happiness, things like spending time in nature, pursuing our passions, or even just practicing gratitude, those things can actually have a big impact on our ability to manage our attention and achieve our goals.
That's a great reminder.
It's like we have this amazing tool, our attention, but we often use it so carelessly, letting it get pulled in all these different directions
Right.
by every little distraction that comes along.
That's a great way to put it, and I think that's where hyperfocus really makes a difference. It's like Bailey is giving us this guide to using that attention more intentionally, shining it on what really matters and tuning out all that noise.
And one of the big things I took away from this book was that there's no one right way to manage your attention. What works for one person might not work for another.
Oh, for sure. Everyone's different.
The key is to become more aware of our own habits.
Yeah.
Noticing what triggers our distractions and trying out different strategies until we find what works best for us.
It's like a process of self-discovery.
Exactly. It's about becoming the boss of our own attention, realizing it's not unlimited and it needs to be managed carefully, just like our time and energy. And it's not about becoming some kind of robot, blocking out all distractions. It's about finding that balance between hyperfocus and scatterfocus, between effort and ease, between engagement and rest.
It's about being intentional with our attention, making conscious choices about where we direct it, and recognizing that we have the power to shape our own focus.
And that's pretty empowering.
It really is.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into hyperfocus, I want to leave you with a little challenge. If you could shine your spotlight of attention on just one thing today, what would it be? What would make a real difference in your work, your relationships, your personal growth?
That's a great question to ponder.
Take a minute and think about it. What deserves your full attention? And what small step can you take today to create the space and the structure to make that happen? Because remember, the ability to manage your attention is a skill you can develop, and it's a skill that can really change your life.
It's a skill worth investing in.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into hyperfocus. We hope you found it helpful and inspiring. Until next time, stay focused.